YouTube. This is Nate, and you're watching I Roll Ones. Just quick little story session here, I guess. By story session, I mean I'm going to tell you some stories uh, regarding prejudice and incidences of prejudice as far as D&D or misconceptions as far as D&D or role-playing games are concerned. Um, Everybody who plays a game, I'm sure, has had some type of experience with this. Everybody who's played Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, anything like that, I'm sure has had some type of experience with this. And I'm going to illustrate three of my own personal uh, instances here because it kind of, a few months ago, it kind of got brought back up based on the last incidents. So, first thing is, when I was a kid, I don't know, 10 years old or so. My brother and I played D&D. We played D&D Red Box, uh, original OG, basic Dungeons and Dragons, and we had a really good time. We enjoyed it a lot. But I have a really good friend whose parents, well, whose mother wouldn't allow him to play with us, and wouldn't allow him to play with us because it was Dungeons and Dragons. However, TSR, making Dungeons and Dragons, also made a game called Star Frontiers. And this friend of ours, he played Star Frontiers a lot, was a big fan of Star Frontiers, and had the Star Frontiers books. And he was allowed to play that. So that was kind of my first introduction to the stigma regarding Dungeons and Dragons, and the mother had Christian beliefs that Dungeons and Dragons was inherently bad. So that was my first connection to that. Roughly 5 years or so ago, um, maybe less. I don't remember exactly, but I was playing. I continued to play Dungeons and Dragons off and on as much as I could, and I got the games back together. And so I'm playing with a few friends of mine, and my wife's coworker finds out about it, and she's a very Christian woman as well, and also brought up the fact of, your husband plays Dungeons and Dragons. Well, isn't that connected to the devil? And she came to me, and my wife told me about this, and of course my wife was like, no, I mean, my husband's not connected to the devil. He doesn't have any satanic beliefs or anything like that. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have anything to do with that. And it was, to me, a sign that that kind of belief system still exists and still is around today. So even from I'm 35 years old now. When I was 10 and playing Dungeons and Dragons in, you know, 1980 or 1990, the the stigma was still there, but then over 20 years later, that that mentality still exists with some people. And I just thought that was really interesting. One of the other things I think is interesting is the other stigma that I tend to get from people, or the other belief that I tend to get from people. And I get this not just with Dungeons and Dragons, but with things like video games and things like that too. As an adult, I'm 35 years old. I grew up on this stuff. I grew up on video games. I grew up on Dungeons and Dragons. And a few months ago, I was at my job, and I deal with certain people painting miniatures at my job. Uh, I expose them to this and their patients that I have, and I help them learn how to paint these things as a hobby. So I was looking through this kind of thing, and this woman that I work with, she looks at me and she says, one of these days you're going to have to let this go, right? I'm like, let what go? She goes, this games, these video games, these miniatures, this Dungeons and Dragons stuff, this fantasy world. And I'm like, why? She goes, because you're an adult. Sooner or later, you're going to have to let those things, you're going to have to stop with those kid stuff. And I just kind of look at this woman like, well, what would you have me do? I'm 35 years old, but what should I be doing instead? I mean, 90% of the adults that I know that are my age, they go to work, they come home, they watch TV. Would you rather have me just doing that? I'm just watch something that somebody else created, or would you rather have me create on my own or use hand-eye coordination playing the video games or do things such as that. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons and that isn't all I do. I do a lot of hobby activities as well. I ride motorcycles, I make knives and do woodworking and things like that, but I enjoy the fantasy, I enjoy the story like pretty much everybody in our culture, in our world does. But I couldn't believe that this woman would look at me and say that I need to put this. I mean, I could believe it, but I wasn't expecting that this woman would look at me and tell me that I need to put this stuff away eventually because it's not the adult thing to do. And I'm just like, how close-minded are people in this world that they would rather just, say, "Hey, you have to be normal and you have to do the normal thing like not play video games, not play Dungeons and Dragons, not paint miniatures, not do this creative stuff, and instead do what every other adult does and go to work, go out, freaking get start drinking after you get done with go to the bar to hang out. I mean, that's what most adults that I know of do. They go to work and they watch TV and they go to bars and that's it. That's their life. And here's mine trying to create stuff, trying to enjoy things and be inspired. And this woman is telling me that someday I'm gonna have to put that away. Anyway, it was just kind of a little rant that I have about that situation. And if you have rants of your own, or I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear anybody else's own issues of prejudice, dealing with prejudice or misconceptions as far as their gaming is concerned. Tell your story. Tell me down below. Right? Do your own video. Uh, just share it. We're here for each other. We're here to listen. We're here to talk to one another. I'm sure nobody's bothered by it because we've had to deal with it all our lives. But it's just it's interesting to see those kinds of misconceptions and those kinds of ideals still going on today after so many years. Um, but yeah, comment down below. Like, subscribe, share if you want to. Anyway, thanks for listening, YouTube. Have a good night.